Good evening, everyone. It's a Jamaican Tory back with you again, here to discuss the moves being made to turn Jamaica from a constitutional monarchy to a republic. So, for the last few videos, I've been focusing a lot on what the Constitutional Reform Committee has been saying regarding the move they intend to make for altering our constitution. This evening, I would like to take somewhat of a different approach where I'm going to be looking beyond Jamaica and into the wider Commonwealth about what other countries have been saying on their relationship with the monarchy. And what I've been seeing is that there are quite a few countries who have been taking a leaf from the playbook of Barbados. And I say Barbados because they're the ones who started this catalyst back in 2021. Right, so don't let anybody fool you that Jamaica is the one taking the lead on this. No, Barbados took the lead on this. We're just following their footsteps. Also, what government wants to do. But I've been looking at what has been happening as far as the acceleration of republicanism is concerned. And I saw a few statements from several prime ministers coming out of the coronation, where it seems as though they are now using the coronation as an excuse to accelerate their plans. For example, the Prime Minister of Grenada has stated that he wants the country to move to a republic under his leadership. The Prime Minister of St. Kitts has made the very bold claim that so long as his country is not a republic, they are not truly free. To me, that's a preposterous claim, but we'll get into that soon enough. While in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves says he thinks the country's entire constitutional arrangement is absurd. Yes, that is the word he used, absurd. Beyond the Caribbean, we also have countries like Australia and New Zealand, where their prime ministers also have Republican sympathies. But let us not be fooled. We are told that this thing is inevitable. But from what I've been seeing, following the trajectory of politics in countries like Australia and New Zealand, it is not as inevitable as it seems, but is in fact heavily dependent on who happens to be in power at the time. I'll give you two examples using those same two countries. So in Australia, the current Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, is a Republican. The previous Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, was also a Republican. However, before her time, the two Prime Ministers that preceded her, which were Bill English and John Key, were both monarchists. And we saw that during the years before Ardern, there was not much appetite for republicanism because the prime minister wasn't too much a fan of it. Turning to Australia. So beginning in the 2000s, we have Kevin Rudd, who was a Republican, Julia Gillard, also a Republican. Then we had Tony Abbott, a monarchist. Then we had Malcolm Turnbull, a Republican. Then Scott Morrison, a monarchist. And now we have Anthony Albanese, a Republican. And what I tend to find that the government's views on the constitutional arrangement is dependent solely on who the prime minister is at the time. So during the tenureship of Tony Abbott, for example, there was a very strong monarchist ethos running through the government. Kind of similar to what was happening with Stephen Harper in Canada, but we'll get to Canada in a minute. So when the government switched over from Abbott to Turnbull, we saw a change where, whereas Abbott had reinstituted orders of knighthood in Australia's honour system, Abbott took them out. Then the next prime minister came in, put them back, and now the current prime minister took them out again. So we always see the shift based on who the prime minister is at the time. But I'll say something about Australia before I move on. Interestingly enough, it was under the leadership of Prime Minister Julia Gillard, who was a Republican, that the Perth Agreement was signed. Let me tell you what the Perth Agreement is. The Perth Agreement is an agreement, sorry, you can't use a word to describe a word. It's a pact between all the Commonwealth realms regarding how the rules of succession was to be altered. And that was the agreement that changed the royal succession rules to a more gender neutral format. And it must be noted that because all the Commonwealth realms are independent countries, there is no way that the law could be passed unless all countries agreed to this treaty. And then they made it in their own domestic legislation. And that happened under Gillard's leadership, which of course was partnered with John Key of New Zealand, David Cameron of the UK, and Stephen Harper of Canada, who were the prime minister at the time. So we always tend to see that the views of different governments is based on who happens to be leading it. Now, I said I would mention Canada because I must be frank, I am rather pleasantly surprised by Canada because I was always under the impression that the Trudeau government, being left-leaning, would have taken a Republican stance. But from what I am seeing, Trudeau's loyalty lies with the crown. And I must commend him for that. And I've even seen where his government has actually made some changes in the Canadian heraldic structure to reflect their ties to the new king. So give him kudos for that. I didn't expect it because he has many views that many Tories wouldn't agree with. And you know how important the word Tory is on this channel because I'm called the Jamaican Tory based on the principles of Toryism. So I'm pleased that Harper took that stance. Now, turning back to the Caribbean and some of the rather absurd statements made. And I will begin with the man from St. Kitts who had the temerity to claim that as long as St. Kitts and Nevis is not a republic, then they are not free. That to me is an absolutely ridiculous argument. Freedom is not based on whether you have a king or a president. Freedom is based on the people having rights. And I would very much like the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and the Prime Ministers of all the other Commonwealth realms to tell me what rights do their people not have under the crown. I'd very much like to know because I can assure you that the Commonwealth Caribbean countries have a lot more freedom than our non-Commonwealth neighbors in countries like Cuba and Haiti, and even in Latin American countries which are also our neighbors like Venezuela and Nicaragua and these countries. And I'm not here to basically bash their political system per se, although republicanism is not my cup of tea. But what I am saying is that if it is that you're going to make the claim that a president or having a president makes you more free, then explain to me why is it that places like Cuba, places like Haiti, persons are, not very happy there. And I know persons will say, for example, Cuba has healthcare and Cuba has education, and these are all good things, fine things. And by the way, monarchy can exist within socialism. Now, Nordic countries prove that. Canada proves that. So this is not bashing socialism per se, because socialism can coincide with monarchy. That's not my point. My point is, when you have a system where items are quote unquote rationed, and where everybody, regardless of qualifications, are basically getting the same wage. So the doctor would be getting the same wage as the bus driver. It sounds very nice and very idealistic, but if you should think about it, if you should go to school for 7 years to become a medical doctor, and the bus driver did not go through that rigorous training for his profession, then it only makes sense that the doctor would be better compensated for his work. But that's not how things run. For example, in a Cuban system where you have a level field. Again, I'm not necessarily bashing Cuba per se, but what I am saying that when it comes to the matter of freedom, you cannot sell me the argument that say Kitts and Nevis is less free than Cuba or less free than Haiti simply because those countries have a president and we don't. In Jamaica, in St. Kitts and Nevis, in Antigua. You cannot sell me that argument. And anybody who has ever looked on any indices, whether corruption indices, democracy indices, freedom indices, will see that the English-speaking Caribbean countries, countries in the Commonwealth, countries that have the king as head of state, rank far higher than our neighbors in the regards to freedom. So this idea that we need a president to be free, and even though this was said by the PM of St. Kitts and Nevis, fact of the matter is, all the Republican leaders across the Caribbean, they all share this view. If they didn't share this view, they wouldn't be doing what they were doing. So they're all in this together. So this is more than just the JLPNP. This is a bigger cabal. Then St. Vincent. I have a major problem with the Prime Minister of St. Vincent's statement. And here's a reason why I have a problem. Now, in Jamaica, we are discussing having a referendum on the monarchy. Barbados, Trinidad went ahead to become republics without ever having a referendum on the matter. St. Vincent and the Grenadines had a referendum on the matter. They had one. And when the question was put to the people, they voted no to a republic. That was the people's choice. So for the Prime Minister to now come and talking about wanting a do-over referendum, he's not respecting the will of the people. How many countries do you see that remove monarchies are going to have a referendum on restoration? Do you think the government of Greece, which had a referendum on their monarchy, which by the way was not King Charles but rather King Constantine, who is actually a second cousin of King Charles, but we're not here to talk about royal genealogy today. When they had their referendum, which by the way was under the auspices of a military government, and they had that referendum to say remove King Constantine. Now that King Constantine is dead and his son, Prince Pablos, is the dynasty heir, do you think the Hellenic government is going to have a referendum on restoring the monarchy? No, they had that referendum already. Take South Africa, for example. The only Commonwealth country that had a referendum in 1961 on removing Queen Elizabeth as head of state and succeeded at it. And this was under an apartheid government. Do you think that now that apartheid has fallen, that the current government of South Africa is going to have a referendum on restoring the monarchy? No, they are not. Because those governments say we had a referendum already, that is the end of the matter. So how is it that in cases where a referendum does not go in the favor of Republicans, they want to have a do-over referendum? Why? And it's not just St. Vincent either. In Scotland, we had that very same attitude when they had the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, where Republicanism was one of the issues that were talked about. It wasn't exactly a sure thing, but we know it was discussed. And when the question was put to the people about whether they wanted to leave the United Kingdom, either to become a separate realm or to become a republic, the Scottish people said no, we want to remain. Now the Scottish government is saying we don't like the result, we want a do-over. Why? And that to me speaks of a certain level of disingenuousness where the ruling class, if they don't get the result that they want, they will have other referendums. And we know for a fact that our Constitutional Review Committee right here in Jamaica, that's what they plan to do because they have said it. I've heard them say it. If we don't get the result we want the first time, we're gonna go back to the drawing board and come up with another referendum soon and very soon if the first one fails. People, we need to keep our eyes open on what this government is doing. I keep on saying, turn out of the polls and vote no. And I will continue saying that. That was, however, said under the assumption that the poll will only be held once. But I'm going to tell you right now, if they come to you 2 times, 5 times, 10 times, come out and vote no, 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 every single time. It's time that the ruling class in all the Commonwealth countries realize that their views and the people's views don't align. And it is time that they stop trying to pull the wool over people's eyes by coming with these semantics and these word games that don't mean anything. What do you mean they are not free as long as the king is head of state? That's not how freedom is defined. Freedom is defined by the ability to do what you want. That is freedom. Not about having a president or a republic. There are far too many republics in this world that are the most ghastly repressive regimes on this planet. And we know them. I don't even need to go into the names. We know them. So, with that said, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, because there is a lot more where that came from. I thank you.